Hello, everyone, and welcome to Municipality, a podcast exploring the wonders of local government through discussions and special guests. It's Matthew, and I have Sam with me for today's special episode about the basic structure and functions of city government. To hear from the entire municipality team, you can also listen to last week's episode on history and future of policing in the U.S. But today, Sam and I wanted to shine some light on how city government actually works on the day-to-day. We've been talking a lot about how local governments are responding to various health and safety issues in the last couple weeks, but today is learning about what city government actually is and how it's able to address such a wide variety of issues. We have a special guest with us, Dr. Brann, who served 2 terms on the El Segundo City Council from 2008 to 2012, and most recently, 2016 to 2019. Dr. Brann is also the founder of Da Vinci Schools and currently sits as the Board of Trustees president. Over the course of his career as a school superintendent, Dr. Brann served 75 different elected officials across 6 different school districts in California. On the El Segundo City Council, he worked with roughly 10 elected officials during his 2 terms. But specifically today, we'll be talking about elections and serving as a policymaker in local government. We are excited to bring you City Government 101, Part 1.
Yeah, and thank you so much once again, Dr. Brann, for being on. We do have a few questions, like we said. The first one we wanted to ask you was, how do elections influence the work that you do in city government? And would you describe this influence as positive or negative?
Well, elections are the key to selecting the representatives of the public that will sit on the council and make those policy decisions. So depending on their qualifications and interests and time, it's very important who sits in those seats and determines how much progress you can make. You want someone without a narrow agenda, someone who wants to benefit the city as a whole, and not someone with just a couple of issues that they want to get resolved, because there's a lot to being on a council. There's just a myriad of issues that are endless, and you want people with the time and the experience and the good intentions to be in those seats. As Matthew said, I served 75 different elected public school district board members in my 35 years as a school superintendent in 6 different public school districts here in California. But then I turned the tables, and in 2008, I became an elected. And I kept in mind the role of the elected, what it was and what it wasn't. I was very conscientious about staying in my lane and letting the city manager direct the staff and carry out the council's directions and wishes, and not to get into his space, because that's not the way to be the most effective team. So I served for almost 8 years over that span, and served with others also. And I compare that to all my work with school district electeds. So the elected is the people's opportunity to place people on the council to represent them that they think will listen to them and will be effective enough to carry out some of the goals that they walk into office with. It means having good people skills and being effective in working on a collaborative team if you're going to be successful and doing your job and not everybody else's. That's hard for some people to not stray into staff's business, but I made it a point because I had too many school board members that strayed into my business as superintendent. And I said, if I ever get elected myself, I'm going to play my role and be good in it and not get out of line. So I had a lot of experience with those 75 electeds I served, and wanted to be a good role model, and that the other council members would see that also.
Yeah, that's always, I thought that was interesting, what you were saying kind of about letting people do their thing, because I had heard that you're kind of known for being more blunt about the points that you speak on.
Yeah, I didn't, when I came on the council, I didn't expect that I was going to turn out to be a maverick, but that's basically what did happen. On both occasions, the second term maybe less so than the first 4-year term. And yeah, I'm pretty blunt. I have the ability to disagree without being disagreeable, so that we can live to fight another day and take on other issues. I lost numerous votes, 4-1, and I didn't enjoy losing, but I was prepared to do it because I feel you have to do the right thing, explain why you're voting the way you are, and then do it. And I always served with a mindset that I would not run again. I would not run for consecutive terms. You heard Matthew say I was 2008 to 2012, and then I took 4 years off. I come back in 16. It's a little unusual, and it's hard to make a comeback because then for the second time you have to defeat incumbents that are in those seats. I was able to do that. The reason I don't serve consecutive terms is because I don't want my votes or issues to in any way be measured against my ability to get reelected. So I pretty much come in, and at the beginning I declare I'm not going to run again. So if you don't like what I do, there's nothing you're going to be able to do about it, because I won't be on the ballot the next time this comes up. And it gives me a great deal of freedom to say and to do what I think is right. And so I really have enjoyed that. And I've represented in particular a portion of the city here, really the older guard. I think I'm the oldest person to ever serve on the El Segundo City Council. Wow. Not that old, but I think I have that record. And I represented the people who built this town. And like in so many communities, you are having a lot of changes in the demographics. And the folks I serve, they don't operate in social media. They don't have smartphones. They don't post things. And when a city tries to communicate with them, ways that they can communicate with millennials and others don't work. Because they just read flyers and they talk and gossip and so forth. And so if you don't recognize that, you're missing a huge segment of the population that's been around a long, long time. And these are people who will vote on Christmas in the snow. They really respect voting, where what I found with many of the younger people, they got involved and posted their thoughts on social media, but they forgot to get down to the polls to vote. There seemed to be a disconnect between how the democracy works and that you have to participate in it, and it doesn't matter what your opinion that you post on Facebook or wherever it is, you've got to vote. And so that's one of the ways I was able to win twice, is because the people who vote and really respect the freedom to do so, they use it. And we haven't done a very good job in this country around civic education. So you've got low participation by voters in a lot of these elections, some of them less than 10%, less than 20% show up. And democracy doesn't work when people don't participate in it. You get a very skewed result. So I think we need to do a better job going forward of explaining the connection between voting and who's going to be a representative. And Yeah, you can blog and get stuff off your chest, but it doesn't count when they come to count the votes.
No, I wholeheartedly agree, and I'm actually really happy that you brought up, voting and all that, because, being a young person, one of the things that drives me nuts is when people my age try to say that their vote doesn't matter. And one of the stories that I like to bring up when they say that is the election of JFK, because it was so close that if one person from every voting district had changed their vote, then he would have never won the election. And that's just one vote. So that's
Right.
one example I wanted to bring
We
up.
saw that in Florida not
Yeah.
too long ago with Al Gore and President Bush. It took forever to figure it out with the hanging chads and etc. But yeah, a very small number of votes can tip it in a different way.
Yeah, and definitely, Dr. Brann, your point about how this country doesn't have a lot of civic education really resonates with me, because in my K through 12 education, there was virtually no instruction on local government, and really the first, I had exposure through my dad's work as a city manager, but in college, that's kind of where, I started to get more involved, and people like Sam, we started going to city meetings and, getting involved with campaigns. But maybe a question I actually just thought of is, coming from your lens as a former city council member and your work in public schools, do you have any ideas for how we can better educate the youth on local government and have curriculum around that?
Yeah, I think you have to take the time to discuss it and study it, and to begin to participate in it, perhaps in high school with mock elections, with tours to a school board meeting, to City Hall, to providing meaningful activities for, say, the student government class to make suggestions. We had one in El Segundo. The last 2 or 3 years we've done this, where in this last case, the challenge was make a better teen center in town. And they were divided, the students they played roles. Some played city council members, some played the city manager, the public works director, the HR director. And they came and they toured the city, and they heard about the challenge to improve the teen center, went out and divided into 4 groups with their government teacher from El Segundo High School, came back then with their proposals, presented them to their panel of student officers playing those roles, who then picked one of the scenarios or proposals, liking that better than the others. All these things teach people where these decisions come from and why things happen in cities or school districts. But you've got to experience it, discuss it, have a concerted effort, and schools get expected to do so much. There's only so much time in the day and school year, and they've been expected to do everything over time. It's just accumulated up, from learning how to drive to sex education, on and on and on. And then there'll be a movement, hey, let's get back to the basics. Let's just teach math and reading. And a lot of these other subjects get short shrift, or they don't get discussed at all. And then you have these behaviors that you repeatedly see across these elections. So I think it's a serious problem for the United States, that lack of participation and that disconnect between thinking social media is going to make any difference at the polls. And I'm sure there's lots of reasons, but remember, the older people were often here during World War II, and they saw these freedoms protected in that terrible war. And so they understand better to use their voting power. and people born, in say 1975 or later didn't see that cost paid. And if they're not studying history, which also isn't done enough in high school, they just don't know. And so we really have to do our best to talk about those things and get people motivated to get involved.
No, I absolutely agree. And I'm actually a student of history. That's one of my majors. So I completely agree. And I actually really like that you brought that up. But I did want to move on because I think we have an important question here. And this is because, a lot of our listeners don't know much about local government. That's why they're listening. What is the jurisdiction of elected officials in city government?
Well, you serve within the boundaries of your respective city that you've been elected to represent the citizens there, not just the voters, but everybody there, even the business people who come into town. So you have concerns and responsibilities around all the issues related to that town or city, to take your action, your ordinances, your policies, and for example, El Segundo's been dealing with Airbnb uses by private residents, accessory dwelling units, where residential housing could be built. There's just a number of issues that the council weighs in on and listens to the public about, gets lobbied one way or another. But you basically, that's your realm, is your city boundaries. And just because you're on the El Segundo City Council, you're not going to have any power in Thousand Oaks or in San Francisco or any place else. You can belong to the California League of Cities and meet those other folks that have the same responsibilities you do in their towns when they come together for conferences. But you have a pretty narrow focus on the city and with the people who put you on the council.
Actually, really quick, just because I've never heard that before, what's the California League of Cities?
Yeah, so it's a collection of city council members. They have different departments. So if you're a city attorney, they'll have programs for you. If you're a public works director, a city manager, they all have their departments underneath the umbrella of the California League of Cities. And they have hundreds of cities who are paying dues and participating and getting exchanges of ideas and materials on how a particular issue is being dealt with in 50 other cities. So it's a kind of a clearinghouse, and there's some lobbying available there up in our capital, Sacramento. And so it's a network. For school boards, you'd have the California School Boards Association, the same kind of thing. Strengthen numbers, put all the cities together, put all the school districts together, and try to speak with one voice if that's possible.
Does that ever become an issue if people have like different political leanings? Like, do you see any like difference between responses, or maybe like some disagreements that occur at meetings, at those meetings?
Absolutely. You know, California is a very diverse state. It's not just all about Southern California. When you get up north of Sacramento, the capital, you don't even quite recognize you're still in California. It feels more like Oregon. And there's different politics up there, land use and attitudes. So this state is really demographically diverse, and small rural districts, for example, are on the wrong side of the digital divide. They don't have the connectivity that we do, say, here in the Los Angeles area or Oakland or San Diego. And they don't have the resources and the ability to communicate in the same way that we do. And this coronavirus that's gone on has pointed that out, how big this digital divide is as an issue really across the country, and how that has to be remedied so we can all get in the same book, at least, if not on the same page. And you have to have connectivity to do things like this interview over Zoom, and that's just not possible. The schools closed here in California mid-March, and some school districts were able to pull off really effective remote programs, and others weren't able to pull it off at all. So there's just real differences. And then, as you could imagine, Oakland, San Diego, LA, Fresno, they're going to have different interests in those urban areas than you're going to find in California's rural cities. So that's why the legislators that are elected from the different regions need to go and represent their part of the state to try to come out with something that best serves all.
It's really interesting, and you kind of touch a little bit upon, the divide in various jurisdictions, and that kind of led me to wonder if you have any effective strategies from your time on the council. You mentioned you're often the dissenting vote and a 4-to-1 vote, and even when running and trying to appeal to various demographics, what would you say, to kind of encapsulate this question, are some of the best strategies for working with people, advancing certain policy ideas?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think here's the best elements. You need to care. You need to listen and not just talk, so that you can understand what people are saying. And from those skills, you can then make meaningful policies. But you've got to listen to the people who put you on the council, and there's not enough listening in this world anymore, and not enough caring either. You've got to give good customer service, basically, to your community and its residents and businesses here. And you really need to be open on issues and not have a narrow agenda, because 4 years on a council, you'll get a lot of things come through that are really different. And so you need to be constantly in a learning mode and doing research and getting ready for that next meeting, those next issues. It does take a lot of work to serve on a council, and I think that scares most people off. And it's just, I was used to it because I'd served on different school districts so long. I think I've been at 12 or 1,300 public meetings between the city council and the school board. And I'm still the board president of Da Vinci School, so meetings are still coming. But it's just how business usually gets done. So in this era where we've taken a break from hugs and handshakes and face-to-face meetings and done everything on Zoom, it's frankly not my best world. It's a world I can navigate and do okay in, but I do a lot better in person when people come together. So I'm looking forward to getting back to that mode.
Awesome. Just one last question for you, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying about listening to the people, and you have all these people who come in that have agendas. What would you say, to what extent is like city government partisan or politically polarized, and in what ways, if any, do you think you'd like to see that changed?
Yeah, well, it varies depending upon the region, the city, the council members. It is polarized in many places. I mean, this country is polarized as a whole at a high rate that I haven't seen since the 60s, around the Vietnam War. The last time we had this much divisiveness. So for me, I don't belong to any political party. When I turned 18 and registered to vote, I declined to state. In other words, I'm an independent, and I've been that way since I started. A lot of that in California is now the second biggest registration group. Number one is Democrats. Number two is declines to state or independents. And number three is Republican. So it's a growing group. And within that group, people may lean Republican or lean Democrat, but there's more and more people less committed to particular parties and more cognizant of ideas and concepts and the individuals running than that they're party line people and whoever the nominee is, they're going to support that because that's a Republican. So I've kept that not in my life from the beginning by being flexible enough to go either way. And so more and more people have come to that. Some of them are, it's kind of popular now, but it's just been my way of life. So I think you'll find that those independents, they will tip elections in many cases. If you combine their lack of loyalty to a particular party, and then with a low turnout at the polls, those are two factors that make it unpredictable. And you're seeing a lot of late voting now, where you can't find out the day of the vote, the day after, or maybe 2 weeks after that, who won. Did that measure pass or not? Because so many ballots came in provisionally right at the last day, the clerks have a hard time adding everything up. And I think this is just a trend that you're going to see keep repeating itself in larger and larger numbers. So that's going to have an impact. And at the same time, our Secretary of State is trying to come up with lots of ways to get more people to vote, where you're going to vote on your phone, you're going to vote at the DMV or the market or whatever, to try to get more people to participate. There's a lot more choices than there used to be. Early voting and some of the things that I used to see in the South, now those kinds of practices are becoming more common. So hopefully that'll lead to more participation, and hopefully people, if they're going to participate, will spend some time getting informed about what the issues are and what the people are like, so they don't get faked out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for joining us on today's episode and sharing your first-person experience. The entire municipality appreciates you and welcomes you into our community. We hope that today's conversation provided some valuable insights into government at the city level. To learn more about anything we mentioned today, you can reach out to us on Facebook at Municipality Podcast, or on Instagram or Twitter at Municipality with 2 underscores. And we're also releasing the second episode of our City Government 101 series in the near future, so stay tuned. Next week, though, we'll be revisiting the topic of protest and local organizing. So as always, we're so glad that you joined us today, and hope to see you again soon in our municipality.